Next, from the state capitol, we go to a Senate committee that hears testimony from foster children who describe how they were separated for years from their brothers and sisters, or had their contact with family members severely limited. The committee is considering legislation that would try to increase family contacts without limiting adoptions. This runs about 25 minutes.
Okay, we do have an amendment. Is it an amendment? Oh. Amendment number 1. Okay. Amendment number 1. And do we have a motion to adopt from Senator Delgado, seconded from Senator Collins? Do we have leave to adopt the amendment? Leave granted. We will so record the amendments adopted. Okay, Senator Hunter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 5592 as amendment modifies the Children and Family Services Act and the Juvenile Court Act of 1987. And it provides that when children are removed from their families and placed in the child welfare system, the Department of Children and Family Services shall place the child with the child's siblings unless the placement is not in each child's best interest or is not possible. If the child is not placed with a sibling, then the department shall consider placements that are likely to develop, preserve, nurture, and support siblings' relationships so that in doing so, it is in the child's best interest. In the past, DCFS has been splitting children up when they're placing them. And we all know what happens when you split a family up. There's all kinds of issues that take place here in terms of fear and loneliness and depression, and I can just go on and on and on and on. Over the past 10 years since I've been here, I've been working with the DCFS Statewide Youth Advisory Board, in which you have two fine young people sitting before us today, where I've actually watched them complete school and grow up to be very positive young adults here. And so at this time, I'd like for my witnesses, April, would you like to start out first, please?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm here to give you a snapshot.
Identify your name and
I'm sorry, April Curtis.
Okay.
I'm here to give you a snapshot of what it was like for 18 years in foster care. Although I was separated from my mom and dad, I had to also deal with being separated from my brothers and sisters. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I had the ability to speak up and learn that I had the voice inside of me to fight, to want to see my brother and sister grow up. Now, this is a little brother that was sent to Puerto Rico, a little sister that was adopted. I was lucky enough to be raised with an older brother, but for many years, I had to wonder whether or not my sister was safe, whether or not my little brother was safe, and didn't know what it was like to spend a Christmas with them, a birthday with them, and just to know their well-being. For us, we take for granted birthdays, holidays. We take for granted a visitation. And being in DCFS, I was allowed once a month, sometimes even lucky twice a month, to see my brothers and sisters, and that's for 1 hour. You do the math, that's 12 hours. If you're lucky, 48 hours. So therefore, in 365 days, I'm given permission to bond with my brother or sister 2 days. A total of 2 days out of 365 days, somebody is recognizing my relationship with my brother and sister. When I leave care, that's who I have. That's who I go back to. So if not given the opportunity to bond with them and grow with them while I'm in care, it becomes harder when you're out of care to find them. I was fortunately lucky that when I found my inner voice, I kept in touch with them. But there was laws and stipulations that weren't in our favor. But it was because of an adopted parent that was okay with us seeing our baby sister. Even though she was adopted, we were lucky. But there are so many young people in care today that I work with that are not so lucky that they get separated and they don't get to know where they're at. They get adopted or they get put in different placements in different towns, and they don't know what it's like to say happy birthday to them. They don't know what it's like to say good morning or to open a Christmas present with them. Things that everyone around this room takes for granted and we get to do with our families now. We don't get to do that when we're growing up in care.
Thank you. And would you like to briefly?
Senator Hunter, can I just want to pause to open it up for a record for a vote? We have a motion to adopt, to pass as amended from Senator Collins, second from Senator Delgado. And Senator Collins wants to be noted as an aye vote on this. She has to leave for a moment. Okay, proceed.
Identify yourself, please.
My name is James McIntyre, and I'm here representing myself and also the DCFS Statewide Youth Advisory Board. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Youth Advisory Board. The Youth Advisory Board is over, it was started back in 1998 as a way of wards of the state to have a voice within the system. It's made up of 14 to 21-year-olds in 4 different regions: Northern, Cook, Central, and Southern. Central is split up between Springfield, Peoria, and Champaign, and Peoria, and Southern is split up between East St. Louis and Carterville subregions. Back in 2010 fiscal year, we started realizing that adopted siblings were not being able to see each other. Either one of them was still in care and the other one was adopted, and we were wondering what we could do to help that. That is when the Representative Feigenholz approached the director at the time and started working with the Youth Advisory Board.
Right.
The reason why this issue is so important to me is because back in 1994, I was placed into the foster care system with my 4 sisters, 2 of which I have not seen since 1997. I have one picture of all of us together, and it's the last time that I've ever seen any one of them. The other 2 were taken away from me back in 2004 due to alleged child abuse and neglect towards me based on the adoptive parents. The adoptive parents were neglecting and abusing me, and they left the state along with my 2 sisters to escape prosecution against them. That's when I knew I had a fight, so no one else is left without any brothers and sisters relationships. 1997 was a long time ago, and if it wasn't for Facebook and if it wasn't for me being nosy and, you know, happening to see my file sitting there on the counter one day at a residential program that I was staying at, I would have never knew my sisters' names or their parents' names. And when I opened that file, when I wasn't supposed to, but I was there because I was wondering, I found out what my sister's adoptive parents' names were, and I Google searched them, and I found them. And then I found them on Facebook. If it was not for Facebook, I would not have any contact with them still. I now have contact with 3 of my 4 sisters, one of which is excited that I'm doing this because she understands what she had to go through when she was separated from me. And I just urge that you guys take into consideration for an aye vote.
Thank you very much. Questions?
First of all, thank you both for sharing your stories. You are very articulate young adults and very nicely done, and thank you for taking your time and sharing this and pushing for your advocacy on this. Anybody have any questions? Senator Stevenson? Yeah, do we have any, I know we did, do we have somebody from the department here, please? Okay, can you please state your name?
I'm not from DCFS, but I did co-chair the work group with DCFS for a year that worked on this legislation.
Can you identify
yourself? Linda Cohen, C-O-O-N. I'm the director of FCAN, Families and Children's AIDS Network. We joined with DCFS for a year to work on this bill and have looked at everything from recruiting foster parents to placing kids to contact during placement and then after adoption. So we have worked with both the Youth Advisory Group, also with the State Adoption Advisory Council made up of adopted parents who've adopted through DCFS, and then also the Foster Parent Association, amongst some others. We also, the Child Care Association is also present, wishes to testify, as does the Public Guardian's Office. But I can try and take your question if I can.
We're trying to see if we can track down the department. They did slip in support, but clearly they're not here right now.
Yeah, are they in support, or are they neutral? Are they neutral, or are they in support?
They're neutral. I thought I saw somewhere that they were neutral. They're supportive. Oh, they're on here as a proponent.
For the last one on your analysis, proponents range from Family and Children's Network, Youth Advocates. The last line is Department of Children and Family Services. And if I'm...
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what is the what is the department's practice now? Do they not try to keep families together, or is that not their current practice?
This would really strengthen their practice so that they would try to keep families together. There's a consent decree that says that they should be doing that, but in terms of practice, in terms of recruitment, training, support for kids while they're in placement, and then also trying to support these what would be new voluntary post-adoption agreements that are voluntary. Those are all new things for DCFS. I can't speak for them because I'm not a department employee, but I did co-chair that work group with them for a year.
So
we met, every meeting was at DCFS with DCFS staff.
So there's a consent decree now that says they have to do that, but they're not doing it now?
That they should be doing it. They're not doing it. I think that, I can't speak for the department, but it's not happening as it should be. So,
it's not?
Right.
So they're not following the consent decree?
Much of it's a practice issue. We formed some subgroups that worked on this again for a year. One was a best practices group, and then one policy and legislation. The policy and legislation built on best practice, and so what we did was come up with suggestions for practice that are in the bill. Danielle Gomez is here from the Public Guardian's Office, and she helped actually develop a lot of the language for the bill. So I'd like to ask her to be able to testify also.
What do you do with, then if you have larger families and there isn't that, and there isn't the ability to place them, then what happens to those larger families then?
Thank you. My name is Danielle Gomez. I'm an attorney with the Cook County Public Guardian's
Can you pull it
Office.
Yeah, I'm not sure if your mic is on, or else pull it closer if it's on.
It's on. It just needs to be close to your mouth.
Okay. My name is Danielle Gomez. I'm an attorney with the Cook County Public Guardian's Office. We're appointed in Cook County to represent children in care. We represent currently over 6,000 children who are primarily in DCFS custody. The consent decree was actually the result of litigation that was filed by our office about a decade ago, settled. The decree was entered about a decade ago. The issue isn't so much that the department isn't following it. The real focus of this legislation was really to get into place post-permanency agreement. So as we have all these children in care, what was happening was siblings in certain situations had to be separated because of resource problems within the department. Other issues, sometimes one sibling needs a different level of care, needs to be in a residential placement. Others can be in foster care. So there's a variety of issues. And as children were moving through the system and entering permanency, either some were being returned home, some were being adopted, that was the point at which a lot of sibling contact gets lost. You heard from April and James about losing contact with those siblings once they're adopted. So the real focus was to be able to have in place a mechanism so that there could be a post-adoption, a voluntary post-adoption agreement or post-permanency agreement that parties can enter into on a voluntary basis. The department can provide support to help the parties reach that agreement, to help them implement it, to help them in the future if problems should arise. The provisions in the bill related to the front end were really designed to support that, and so what it really includes is enhanced provisions at the front end regarding really recruiting and training foster parents, licensing workers who license the foster homes, caseworkers who work with the families to really recognize the value of sibling relationships. Part of the problem that we have now that we see frequently is in order to meet the requirement, that the sibling visitation requirements that do exist, frequently what will happen, foster parents have a lot on their plate. Kids need to visit parents, kids need to go to therapy, kids need to go to school. A lot of times what will happen for sibling visits is the caseworker will come pick the child up. The children will all meet at McDonald's, the caseworker supervises, and then they all go home. The problem is that the people who are going to end up parenting the children long-term as the adoptive parents haven't met one another. They don't know each other. So once the adoption goes through, the chance that they're going to be in a position to preserve and nurture and develop that relationship is really minimized. So the provisions of the bill are really meant to enhance the Aristotle P. consent decree that requires the sibling visit, but also bring the foster parent to the table. Make it an expectation that if you foster a sibling who's part of a larger sibling group, that you're expected to be part of the planning and the implementation of visits. So that's kind of the enhancement part that we're talking about.
That part, and that part I understand, and I don't have any concern with that. I guess I'm concerned on the front end. It makes it sound like that the shell is that these families aren't going to be allowed to, these children aren't going to be separated to begin with, to even have those relationships, that a foster parent or adoptive parent is going to have to take the entire family, as opposed to like the cases you talk about, some that may have special needs that may not be there, or what about in cases where we have step families? Is the shell part of it, I guess I'm trying to understand when it comes to this.
Right. The shall part of it works within the existing DCFS rules and regulations, and so there is a provision in the bill that provides that it shall place according to the department's rules, and the department, as part of the Aristotle P. consent decree, has implemented rules that kind of prioritize that shall provision. So it has a provision that if it's contrary to a child's best interest, for example, and that language is run throughout the bill. And in the department's existing rules, there's then a list of 4 or 5 situations where it would be contrary to a child's best interest to be placed with a sibling. One of those is if a child needs a different level of care. One child needs residential. One of them is if a child is placed with a relative and that relative can't take all the siblings. Frequently we see situations where children have different maternal or paternal families, so one grandma maybe can take the 2 that are her grandchildren but not the others, and so those children will, under the existing rules and under this law, there will still be situations where siblings are split up for a variety of reasons. But in those examples,
though, that's in the best interest of the parents or the grandparents, not in the best interest of the child. And so I guess then how do we define what's in the, I mean, that's what's practical for these families, but that's not necessarily what is the best for those for the child. And so with this legislation saying shall and the best interest of the child, how does that work then in the examples you just gave, where it's in the most convenient, or it's what's practical, it's what can work, but it's not what's best when you're dealing with those families.
For the child. Sometimes in our office we represent the children, so we struggle with these questions all the time. Sometimes it is best for the child. We have a lot of different situations. So say, for example, we have a child who comes into care and has been living with grandmother for 5 years, and then 5 years later another sibling is born and brought into care, and that grandma can't take that second sibling. Then you need to make a choice for this 5-year-old now. What is best for that 5-year-old? Do we move the 5-year-old away from grandma? Do we not place together? And they're very, very tough decisions. They're very tough decisions. And so sometimes,
which is why we hope they're making the right decisions now. I guess so my question is, does this legislation change that decision authority by implementing shall, as opposed to right now where you're taking all those considerations as part of your decision process? You're part of that process. The others are. That system seems to be currently working. Does this, on this part of this bill where you're talking about shall, does that change that from where you're at now?
No. It prioritizes the placement of siblings together, but it also recognizes the existing rules that DCFS has to kind of go through that process of considering what's best for an individual child, and allows that decision making to happen so that hopefully the answer you reach is what's best for the individual child.
In this legislation, then that's spelled out, that how shall is defined, that it takes
and
those,
it specifically recognizes the existing department's rules with respect to placing children.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.